All right, welcome everyone as our attendees are joining us tonight. Thanks for taking the time to join the March operations meeting. So we'll give it a minute or two here for people to join us. So good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us at this March operations meeting. We'll just give it another minute or two for anyone who is just clicking in. All right, and one more time, welcome to everyone. I'm Lynn Hatton, the superintendent. Welcome to our March operations meeting. If you would like to make a comment, please add your name and address into the chat. And with that, we will turn it over to our chair, Mr. Katanis.
Thank you, Ms. Hatton. First of all, welcome everybody. And I have to make this statement before we start. Pursuant to Board Policy 1B5, all meetings of the Salisbury Township School District are audio and video recorded. The district disclaims any and all liability arising from the recordings of the meetings and for any statements made by these in attendance. Okay, with that, again, welcome everybody. And Mr. Taylor, can I have, first of all, I'll call this meeting to order. And Mr. Taylor, can I have a roll call?
Mr. DeFrank.
Here.
Ms. Frick.
Here.
Mr. Katanis.
Here.
Ms. Glenister.
Here.
Mr. Ganal.
Here.
Mr. Hattinger.
Here.
Ms. Klinger.
Here.
Ms. Nemitz.
Here.
And Mrs. Ziegler.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that takes us to 2.1, the 2021-2022 preliminary final budget changes. Mr. Taylor.
All right, I'll just share my screen in just a moment. All right, so most of the stuff is stuff you've already seen. And does everybody see the presentation now?
Yes.
All right, perfect.
Yep.
But I'll go over the, some stuff we've seen before, but then also some additional information since the preliminary budget from February. So just an update on the timeline. March 4th, which is tomorrow, is the deadline to seek approval for Act 1 exceptions to PDE. March 24th is the deadline for the Department of Ed to rule on the exceptions. May 12th will be when the board needs to adopt the proposed final budget. May 27th, the proposed final budget will be available for public review. And then June 16th would be the adoption of the final budget. The preliminary budget revenues, once again, based off of December 7th assessed values, the mill's worth $1,318,920. And you've seen the assumptions made in the local revenues, reduction of the taxable assessed value. State revenues, we still have not changed any of our budgeted amounts for any increases except for the PSERS and FICA, which goes proportionally with your salaries. And we've not adjusted any of the federal revenues. The governor's budget, which we touched on briefly last month, was presented on February 3rd. And based on it as it was presented, there was going to be an increase of $1.35 billion to the basic ed funding formula, which based on that proposal, we would see an increase of a little over $1.4 million, which is a 57% increase from what we received in 1920 and subsequently again is scheduled for this year. Obviously, that's a significant increase and would be a tremendous boost to the budget of the district. They're also proposing a $200 million increase to special ed funding, which we would obviously expect to see some sort of increase from that as well. Some of the challenges with the budget is it requires the personal income tax rate to increase from 3.07% to 4.49%. The tax exemption rate would increase as well. So part of the proposal is that while they're raising the income tax rate, there will be additional families that would not be taxed because of their income. So they're saying that would actually help out some of the lower income families. It also has a minimum wage proposal in there. which it would go to $12 an hour, I believe, next year, and up to $15 an hour after a couple of years. That was all part of the budget proposal. There's charter school reform in there that would be very beneficial to the district as well. And then also it would increase the minimum wage for teachers to $45,000 a year, which in this part of the state isn't as much of a challenge, but there's definitely rural parts in central Pennsylvania where teachers start out at less than $45,000 a year. So that's all part of a package of the governor's budget. The legislator basically said it was dead on arrival. A couple of their concerns is the minimum wage increase, which the governor tried to propose last year, got shot down. And then obviously the increase in the personal income tax rate has some in the legislature concerned. So at this point in time, we really don't know which way the budget's going to go. We don't expect it necessarily to pass in substantial form as it is, but if they made some of those changes, could they still get potentially an income tax increase and still have some of this additional funding? Possibly, but until we start to see what some of that movement is from the legislator and refer to some of the experts in the field like PASBO to really understand what we think we might get, we obviously are not going to budget that increase and then have that rug pulled out from under us in June. So we're hopeful that some of these things go through, especially with the cyber charter schools. They'd be setting a standard rate across the state, which would be lower significantly than what we're currently paying. So that'd be helpful, but we'll have to wait and see really as that flushes out. The expenditure considerations, we've already reviewed salaries and benefits for budgeting current positions and with the increase in the PSERS and healthcare costs. Charter school and transportation costs are in there and special ed as of what we know, but as we get further along in the year and closer to the end of the year, we'll see if there's any changes to the enrollments in either charter schools and if we have any additional needs of special ed that we currently aren't aware of. Just remember from last month, we went over the charter school, cyber charter school. It's not tuition free. As you see, the numbers have gone up a little bit this year compared to the prior year. But those can be substantial increases to the district's costs, right? On the median assessed valued home, for each student that goes to a non-special ed student that goes to a charter school, it costs almost 4 median residential properties tax dollars to support one student. And for a special ed student, it takes almost 10 median residential properties tax dollars to support just one student going to a charter school. So there's obviously some significant consequences to the district to fund these charter school expenditures. The preliminary budget expenditures, like I said, we're budgeting existing positions, and then the salary increases and step movements that are contractually we're obligated to. Support staff, their increases on the new contract follows the Act 1 index. So with the Act 1 index at 3% this year, that would be their increase, but it aligns with the tax increase. Retirement, PSERS has gone up a little bit from the 34.51% this year to 34.94%. And they're supposed to be releasing projections in the coming months for the next couple of years. They usually give us projections in a few years out. We're hoping to see that increase slows down and eventually reverses, but that's still probably a couple of years away before that happens. And then the health insurance, we're still budgeting the 10% increase through the consortium. So the allowable millage rate, our current millage rate is 20.5106. The Act 1 index of 3% gives us the 0.6153 for a total allowable millage of 21.1259. And based on the current assessed value, that would give us an increase, allowed increase of tax revenue of $770,955. And in the current, in the adopted preliminary budget, that we had expenditures of $39,848,000, which would require a millage rate of 22.1110. And that rate does exceed the Act 1 index, which was the first step to allow us to apply for exceptions. Now the Act 1 exceptions, like I said, the Act 1 index is 3%. Our preliminary budget did exceed that allowable rate. So we were eligible to apply for exceptions based on special ed and PSERS. We went through the application through the PDE's website and filled out all the information. And this year we did not qualify for either. PSERS growth rate has be lower than the 3%. In special education, well, our growth rate is still growing and it's still increased from the year before. The increased funding that we received from the state last year for special ed counted against that increase. So when they factored that in the 3% increase, we were not actually eligible for any special ed exceptions this year. So the maximum tax increase we can have is the 3%, unless the board were to put up a referendum for a referendum vote during the primaries this year. So that would be the only other way for the board to increase taxes beyond that 3%. So that's the big update that we have is Act 1 index. There is no exceptions that the district's eligible for this year. So this is an update of the preliminary budget summary screen. Before you saw, we had a third column that showed potentially what the Act 1 index exceptions would be. Well, since there is none, that column's gone now. So if we go to the Act 1 index and raise that 770,000, based on the preliminary budget expenditures, our budget gap is 1.2 million, which we have to close. And there's a variety of ways that we're still looking at to do that. Obviously, if the state budget goes through with the additional 1.4 million, that takes care of it. With that not being extremely likely, we still have to see what other options. There's a number of options that we'll go through on the last slide of things that still need to be determined. But the maximum tax increase would mean on a median residential valued property, an increase of $108.54 for this year if we go with the Act 1 index. The issue still to be resolved, obviously the big one is that state budget, the potential increased funding of 1.4 million, but there's numerous hurdles to approval. Tax assessment adjustments, for assessments by owner, property owner initiated appeals, the district initiated appeals where they fall, and our LVHN appeal, if there's any resolution to that before the end of the fiscal year. Employee retirements, professional staff need to notify the superintendent at least 60 days prior to retirement, and other staff could retire at any time. With each retirement, when you bring people on at the starting wages, there is some savings there. So depending on, what notices we get for retirement, that would also factor into closing some of the budget gap there. Some other unknowns still are the special education service charges from the IU. We, want to see if there's any projections of any increases, if we identify any additional students' needs. Charter school enrollments, hopefully they do not increase, and see if there's any students that do come back, once we get through the pandemic or start next year, hopefully on a little bit more of a normal schedule, hopefully. Does that change charter school enrollments? Do more students come back? In addition to that, even just our VAST program, there's obviously a cost for that, significantly less than charter school, but do we get some of those students back as well? And then any other budget savings and or additional requests that we work through. So the big things really are is what shakes out the state budget, employee retirements, and then a few other things that we can look at to closing this gap. And as we get through the next few months, we'll obviously have more information as we hit some of those hurdles and get some of that information. Does the board have any questions on the update for tonight?
Mike, when
Yes.
do we normally get our state money if we are able to get at least part of that 1.4 million? When do we usually receive that?
It varies year to year. Last year, they actually flushed out pretty quick. Even with the pandemic, they were able to give us some good ideas. And basically, they just guaranteed that they keep it at the prior year levels, right? They had originally said, February of last year, they were projecting an increase. And then once March came in the pandemic, they go, oh, well, wait a minute, we're gonna have a budget issue. We can't do that. And then they came back and said, okay, we'll at least keep funding level. So that we actually knew pretty early that, yeah, we weren't getting an increase, but that was gonna be level funded. The fact that there's so much in this budget, I would not expect the budget to be approved early at all. I would expect it to probably go late into June, but we would likely start hearing things in April and May, just through the legislative advocacy of PASBO. They'll start hearing from representatives of things that they think will fly and won't fly, right? And I think the biggest hurdle would be is really, even if they strip out some of the things like the minimum wage increases that are political, issues, they need that tax increase really to have the funding to be able to give significant increases. So I think once the legislative updates come out from PASBO, I think we'll have a better idea as we get closer if there's any movement or any weight behind doing the income tax increases, right? I mean, that's going to be the thing that really hinges on the big money for us. And some of the other things is we have some of these grants that are starting to come through, from the funding from, the COVID funding from the federal government. The federal government right now is still working on that bill that the House of Representatives passed, and that the Senate's debating right now. And it looks like there's some significant funding that might be coming our way. It's just, do we actually get it? And if we do, what are the strings tied to it? And so the things we got to be aware of is sometimes, like I said, back in 2007, 2008, when the federal government had their ERA money, a lot of it replaced reductions in state funding. So if they don't have the tax increase at the state level, not only will we not probably get that increase, but there's a possibility that they might actually decrease funding or hold us level set. So long story short, don't know for sure, George, but I would expect that we probably won't have a better idea at least till towards later in April or early May, and probably won't have the final thing until June.
All right.
Mike,
Thank you.
question for you on the federal money. That's a one-time thing, correct?
Yes, but a lot of these are spread over like 2 fiscal years. So
Okay.
it might be one time, but depending on what we get in the restrictions, we might be able to
Okay.
use some of it over this year and next year.
Okay, good. So it's a one time, but it could be some level of recurring that we could look at, because you never want to put a one-time occurrence to any reoccurring expenditure, but use it correctly. So, because then you have that to make up the next time again. Although at this point we'll take whatever we can get, but really that's the rule of thumb. Thank you.
Yeah, and the one thing I do want to point out is I've been concerned that next year and the year after, I was concerned that the Act-1 index would go down because of the economy. And I was a little concerned about that, but I came across something very interesting today, and I will pull it up real quick because it kind of shocked me. And I still think the numbers are wrong, but these people do this stuff with the budget a little bit more than I do. So let me pull it up for you. And it gives us a little bit of hope if it's even close to being accurate. All right, let's see. So let me just pull this over. Let's all right, can you see do you see the school district property tax forecast?
Yes.
Okay, so this is from the independent fiscal office of the state of Pennsylvania, and they put out this forecast every year, and they've been relatively accurate. And what I'll show you, the independent fiscal office, and right here is the historical Act-1 index, this base index, right? So for next year, 21-22, it's at 3%. And as you see, but years before is 2.6, 2.3, 2.4, and 2.5. They're still projecting it to be 3.5 next year, and then 3.7 the year after, and 3.3. I thought these numbers would be lower, and I still expect that they probably will be lower, but I was afraid that they could be like 1.5 or 2 or low 2s. And part of it is based off 2 years of information. So they already have part of the information that they're calculating on, and they're guessing and estimating based on future years. But they're still showing optimistic that the unemployment, the state average weekly wages will increase, and that the unemployment cost index, even though we're hearing about this record number of unemployment, somehow they're still calculating that they're projecting a 3.5% increase for the following year for the Act-1 index. So while things are still very concerning, this gives a little bit of optimism that obviously with property taxes being 2/3 of our revenue, and if we were limited to a 1.5% increase, that could be very challenging in the next couple of years. But it looks like that it might not be as bad as I thought, but we're not banking on it. But I decided to share that since that this was just released recently by the state budget office.
Mike, in the previous years, how accurate have their projections been?
Pretty close. They were projecting this 3% about a year and a half ago. And so it came out, and the last version said it was going to be 3.2, I think, for 22-23. So they have actually raised it a little bit. So if they're projecting 3.5, I wouldn't expect it to drop to 1.5 or anything, right? But I still wouldn't be surprised if it was a little bit below 3. But maybe it won't crater as bad as I was fearing it could. So we'll have to wait and see how it shakes out. But we'll have a better idea, next fall, before we get into the preliminary budget phase again. Any other questions on the state budget? I mean, on our proposed budget currently?
Oh, Mike, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, that takes us to the technology refresh, Chris Smith and Kelly Pauling.
Thank you, Mr. Gatanis.
Oh,
Kelly, are you gonna? Thank you. So while we go through this presentation, what I'm gonna do is outline what our current inventory and current structure looks like, what we're proposing for the future, and why we think now's the best time to do this. So why don't you go ahead and advance to the next slide. Okay, so currently,
Sorry.
it's okay. So currently, all right, we're good now. So currently we're a 1-to-1 program through K through 12, with K and 1 having iPads, and then 2 through 12 having laptop MacBook Airs. We also have additional devices for administrators, professional staff, support staff, our TV studios in both the middle school and the high school. And then we also have devices available for substitutes, as well as repairs, loaners for when we have repairs or new enrollments. Currently, we're on our 4th year of the lease for those devices, and they were leased over 4 years at a rate of $490,741 per year. So that's where we're at. At this point, that lease payment has already been made. So we own these devices outright at this point, which becomes very important in future slides. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, so our proposed plan is to continue with a 1-to-1 program, but what we want to do is push the iPads up through all of elementary. So grades K through 4 would have an iPad with a change in the case. So the case that we want to actually provide moving forward will have a keyboard attached to it so that kids can work on those keyboarding skills. And I'm going to let Kelly talk a little bit more about why we've made this decision from a curricular standpoint.
Thanks, Chris. We've been talking about actually the viability of an iPad for quite some time. We actually started last summer and fall, thinking ahead about what we would need in classrooms. We did purchase one iPad and iPad pencil, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and a case. And we actually tested it. We gave it to some teachers to try with students. One of the things that we found were that some of the software programs and applications have been upgraded during this last 4 years. So things like using Google and finding documents had in the past been a little wonky, to say the least. You could do it, but there was a little more involved. And we found with the latest updates that had been smooth. We have upgraded our printers. Printing on the iPads had been difficult in the past, and we've updated them. And I think operationally, having one device that we're supporting in a building, it also makes some things easier at the building level. So the feedback we got from teachers, although it was limited because of the pandemic, but we did get some 3rd and 4th grade teachers and 2nd grade teachers to take a look at the device. And we got really good feedback. The mobility of the device, it like fit on the desk better. They could do the productivity tasks well. And they could also use some creative features, the photo, making movies, recording audio, all of that was much more mobile with the device. So we didn't feel like we lost any productivity tasks, and we got all these other creative tasks that we could do with it. So we were pretty pleased with the test, and are suggesting that would be a better way to go for moving forward for our younger learners.
All right. And then what we want to have happen for our secondary grades 5 through 12 is to once again go with the MacBook Air. At those levels, they're getting into a little more processor dependent software that really lends itself better to a laptop than what an iPad can provide. Additionally, because the whole idea of being able to have that mobile device, particularly when you're talking about being able to pick it up and go and do movies, things like that, the iPad definitely excels at that versus a laptop. So one of the things that we do want to do is add a iPad cart of 30 for the high school, so that the high school kids are able to take advantage of the mobility of the iPad as well. And then just like what we currently have, administrators, professional staff, support staff, the TV studio equipment would all be replaced. And then like what we currently do for our repair pool, as well as our substitute pools, that they're able to come and get a device when they need it, when they're in the building. So this proposed plan would come in for a 4-year lease at $472,088 per year. So it's about a $20,000 decrease over what we're currently paying, which obviously is to the benefit of the district. So one thing that's very important, and one of the main reasons why we advocate to continue to stay with the Apple product and the Apple ecosystem and that partnership that we have with them, is that the Apple products maintain their value significantly more than any other device. The value of our current inventory would be $518,000 as a minimum, and it will have a possibility, they rate the system. There is a chance that that amount will go up, but that is what we're getting right now as a quote, as a bare minimum so far. And we have quoted out with 4 different vendors, and I have also asked them for references and have followed up with those references as well. So one of the main reasons that we feel, well, why now? Why should we do this right now? So there's a couple of different things that really play into that. First thing, if you remember last year, our devices went out of warranty. So this year, our devices were out of warranty. We've been able to make that work without any real issues. One of the main reasons for that is the district is an Apple authorized service provider. So we're able to do all our Apple repairs in-house. All of our computer techs are certified with Apple to be able to do those repairs. So we can't work on other devices, but being able to work on our own definitely saves the district a significant amount of money and allows us to work on those devices, whether they're warranty or out of warranty. That's one reason why to continue to stay with Apple, and why to move now, because the devices are now going to be into their 2nd year of being out of warranty. The further that goes, the more likelihood of damage, more likelihood and more expensive those devices are going to get. One other thing that Apple's gone and has made some changes to what their Apple Care program is. And there's some significant enhancements that not only will be a savings to the district, but we are reevaluating what our current insurance policy is and what that looks like, to where I do see a significant decrease for families as well to enroll in our self-insurance policy with the changes that Apple's made. One with the student laptop devices, particularly in the high school where they're in the photo classes and the media classes, the current devices have 128 gigabyte hard drive. Sounds like a lot, especially when you compare it to a lot of other devices. When you're getting into those large video files and large photo files, that amount of data gets eaten up pretty quickly. So the new devices that we're proposing will double that data for our students. They will be coming with 256 gig SSD hard drives in them. And then there's significant advancements in the technology. One of the things, as far as from the iPad, is the integration of the Apple Pencil and the Logitech Crown. So right now, the iPads we have are not compatible with those devices. We did order an Apple Pencil, and we have that in already. to pilot that. And then we do have a Logitech Crown on order so that we can compare the two devices. And we will be putting forth a proposal to provide one of those devices for each elementary student and teacher later on. But it wasn't ready for this. We want to pilot it, find out which device is going to serve our needs best, depending on what we need. But the other main difference and advancement is in the MacBook Air, there's a new chip. It's called the Apple M1 chip, which is a significant increase in performance. Having that chip, the only devices that have that chip right now are the MacBook Air and the Mac Mini. They're the only devices in the Apple lineup that currently have that chip. That chip has such a performance increase that if you were to buy a computer, one of their high-end Apple devices that could have cost you about $10,000, this machine will be able to beat that on benchmark testing at a significant decrease of cost, all because of that chip. So being able to capitalize on what I just talked about as well, what our current inventory value is. The longer we push that out, the lower that amount's going to go. One other thing that's helping to boost that number, aside from Mac being able to maintain their value, is the whole pandemic. There are a lot of people that need devices. And if they can't afford a new one, they are going through and needing to purchase used equipment. That causes the reseller to be able to charge higher amounts, and their demand goes up. And when their demand goes up, they also need the supply. So right now they're willing to pay a premium for the devices that we currently have. And then also the availability of grant funding. This would be an acceptable use of some of those grant funds if that's how we choose to use that. And so as far as timeline, what we're looking at is ideally we'd like to place the order in the spring of 2021 for two main reasons. One of them is Apple and most tech companies are expecting a backlog the longer that we wait, especially with the funding. So the further we get into the summer months, that backlog is going to become significant, where we may not get the devices in time for us to be able to turn them around and get them ready and get them out into teachers and students' hands. Ideally, once we do get those devices in place, we want to turn around the staff computers as soon as we possibly can. Obviously, we don't have a particular month there because we need to know when we're going to be able to get that, because there are some backlogs that are already in place. iPads do have a little bit of a backlog right now. Pencils, things like that do have a backlog at the moment. So depending on how long they take to come in, we would want to turn those staff devices around very quickly. Our current device sell-off, we would be slated for June 30th timeframe to be able to get those devices all out the door by June 30th. Then throughout the summer, we would work with the technology department to provide some professional development throughout the summer to staff, and with a goal of an August 2021 distribution for student devices.
However, we may have some summer programming that we've not finished yet that may impact that. So
Right.
we may adjust that based on summer programming needs. This is just a sort of rough outline for where we are today. It's there's some
And obviously-
flexibility here.
Right. And obviously getting those systems early would absolutely be a necessity if we do need to have devices available for students for the summer. And so with that, we'll open it up for any questions.
Chris,
Yep.
you had talked about spring. You want to pull the trigger in spring. Are you talking like what, April?
Yeah, ideally, if we could get an order in April, that would be great. We wouldn't be billed in any way until after July. So even if we place the order in April, it will not touch this year's budget. Our first bill would happen in July.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, question for you, Sam DeFrank. When you reference grant funds, which grant funds are you referencing? Federal, other, or which ones are you referencing?
The federal grants.
Good, because they have a lot higher probability of happening at this point in time. Thank you.
Chris, I have a couple questions for you real
Sure.
quick. So one of the questions I have is durability of the keyboards for the iPads. I've had personal experience with them, and my experience is they're not the most durable things in the world, because how they interface with the iPad itself kind of gets wonky after a while. They fold up kind of funny. I mean, now granted, I'm normally shoving mine in my briefcase and running through the airport, but what could you say about the durability of these types of keyboards that you're talking about? Because kids will be kids.
Yep.
And
Yeah, currently we only have one. What the case is, it's called the Logitech Rugged Combo. It's actually rated very well. One big advantage with it is it's a sealed keyboard. So the top layer is sealed. It's not like separate keys. So even if you spill something on it, it's not going to soak in. It's not Bluetooth. It actually connects through, I'm not sure what iPad you have, but the newer iPads, there's 3 dots on the side.
Yep.
Of the iPad. It uses that interface rather than connecting through Bluetooth. And it's actually embedded like right into the case. So even when you're charging the iPad, it charges right through those 3 dots as well, to where it maintains its battery. It's actually from what we have and what I've seen of it, I wouldn't be concerned about durability with this case.
So it's more of a harder case, a harder keyboard case. Because I'm thinking like some of the ones that I've used have been on like almost like roll up type things.
Oh yeah, absolutely nothing like that.
I'm in the wrong neck of the woods as far as what I'm thinking. My next question for you, as far as running some of the programs on the iPads, I know at least in the 4th grade, in last year, I know they used to run programs like Moby Max and Zern, and those are pretty hefty programs. Are you still going to be able to run those on those iPads?
Yep, they do it right now.
Okay, that's good enough. And then my last question is with the money that comes back.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this is more of a question for the rest of the board as well, is what do we do with that money then? Obviously, I see Lynn chuckling already, like she was.
I got some ideas myself.
or something, but
Had some ideas, but we didn't make any promises.
Yeah, I have some ideas if you'd like me to share. Because
my personal, is there a way to defray our annual commitment through the next 4 years by using that, like not using it all as one lump sum, but like can we spread out that 500 and some odd thousand over the 4 years, so that now all of a sudden we're having a smaller payment?
You can. That
doesn't seem like a very big vote of confidence there.
Well, no, I know for a fact that you can, because we have done that in the past. We have deflated our lease payments by using our equity to pay down the lease. So you absolutely can do that. What I would probably advocate more for is some of our building infrastructure is becoming outdated, particularly in the elementary building. It's in need for a Wi-Fi upgrade. Some of our switches need to be, they're kind of at their end of the life. Our smart boards are pretty outdated. Do we want to move toward, instead of having a smart board, having like TVs and Apple TVs? So if you look at it from a technology standpoint, these things are all going to have to be replaced at some point. So to me, the way that I look at it, and ideally what I would like to do with it, is to fund an infrastructure project where we're able to meet some of those infrastructure needs without having to impact the budget. It's things that have to be replaced at some point anyway. I could either come to you and say, well, now I need to increase my budget by X amount of dollars to fund a infrastructure project, or we could use some of these funds to fund an infrastructure project.
Yeah, no, and that's a very good, it's a very good idea. And I'm not saying that's one is better than the other at this point in time. The thing I've realized now is never play poker with Mike, because he hasn't blinked through all of this to give us kind of any kind of lead as to what he's thinking to do with the funds. But thanks for the input. I like the direction you're thinking, because it is kind of making sure that we can use the computers in the best way possible.
Yeah, and also like infrastructure it necessarily isn't a annual expense. So if you fund a project, that'll get you through for that 5 years or so when we're ready to do this again. And then you'd have that residual value again in the devices to be able to then fund the next upgrades, whatever needs to happen. So to me, it's a way to be able to keep our buildings from a tech standpoint up to date and secure and moving forward.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
I don't have a question, but just a comment. I'm excited that our youngest learners are going back to iPads. I have a second grader in my house, and the computers, the laptop's been a little bit of a challenge at times this year. My daughter is strong. She's certainly not the smallest in her class, but just the weight and the size of the laptop versus her size has been a challenge for her to carry. And Chris, you might want to cover your ears, like she's dropped it a couple of times.
That's why I have the cases on them. So.
Yes, our cases are amazing. It has not broken. And also, you know, for kids in like first, second grade who are still mastering reading and spelling and those types of things, having a touch screen as opposed to only a computer keyboard, and like they're not the best with the mouse. Like, I just think that the iPad's a better option for them. So thank you for moving them back.
Yep. Any other questions?
So basically, Chris, just general consensus from the board. Everybody think about it for. Lynn, have you given any thought relative to when this would be on the agenda, for the official vote?
Yes, this month.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if we want to plan ahead, it gives us the opportunity then to really think about which grant funds we're going to commit to this, you know, where we're going to commit to using that buyback money, whether we're going to pay. The grant funds we're considering is about 1.7 million. So how much of the grant funds do we want to use? And we're really going to rely heavily on Mike's expertise to talk with the finance and determine what's the best way to move forward to secure the devices we need, secure the best price for our buyback that Chris has been negotiating, and then also determine how to meet the future needs of the tech department.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, I
So-
did have one. I'm sorry, I had one other question. Are you going to have? Is the plan to have some devices available in the elementary school? I mean, the laptops themselves, in case there's a scenario where it would be better suited to use a laptop versus similar to what you said for the high school.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of reverse. So currently they do have a cart, so that will be maintained. There will be a cart of laptops. So basically like a building set that they'd be able to take out of the library or wherever the building decides to house it and use as need be. Same with the middle school, because they would be mainly laptop. They would have a cart of iPads. They currently do. So that would be replaced. So they would have that. The only real change that's happening is that the high school does not have a cart right now. And so that we're looking to add that in.
We anticipate that card at the high school also be helpful for, we're pushing in more mobile technologies into our computer science classes. So we want kids to be able to test things that they're making. And so these would be devices that they could use for those purposes as well. So we think it's a really good option to support our learners for other things they need to do in school.
Science, I think, is going to be like a key area where that will definitely be used, because there's a lot that you can do with augmented reality now with the iPad, and a lot of apps that really lend themselves well to science with augmented reality there.
Okay. So unless I hear otherwise, it sounds like you have general consensus from the board for this to be on this month's agenda. So it looks good. Kelly, thank you for the educational part of this. And Chris, thank you for your IT expertise. You thought this out, and it makes a lot of sense. So thank you for your effort with that.
Thank you.
Okay. So that takes us to maintenance equipment. Mr. Brackett, are you with us?
As soon as I unmute, I am, yes.
Okay. The computer's yours.
Good evening. I hope this finds everybody healthy and safe this evening. Let me get to the right screen and I will share that with you. So the maintenance equipment, let's see if we can screen share this or not.
You should have rights, Bill.
Yeah. I'm going to see if this comes up.
Yep.
Everybody's able to see that, I hope.
That's good.
So what we're looking to do is to purchase a skid steer loader. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures here in a few minutes. This is going to be a multi-use device throughout the district. Depending on the time of year is where it will be stationed at. If you remember, just real quickly, if you're unfamiliar with what a skid steer loader is, there's two quick pictures, and they happen to be pictures of our the main proposed use for this equipment. So we had a big storm this year, and it seems like we have one of these storms almost every year. Last year being the anomaly. The biggest problem with these storms. This is in front of the admin building, and when the township comes and clears the road directly across from the admin building, they push everything down the end of the road and right into our lot. The other part is in the corner of Salisbury Road and Salisbury Road and Gaskill. They come off those two roads and push everything up onto the sidewalks. The equipment we currently have, we cannot move this snow when it gets to this size of a pile. So this is extremely taxing on our equipment. And in the past, and like this particular storm, we actually had to call a contractor in to move this snow for us. The contractor comes in with the skid steer loader. So he's able to pick up bucket by bucket and move this and push it out of our way so that we can get our trucks through. So this is a very taxing type storms on our equipment. You look back just at this particular month, February, we probably received, I think we were a little bit over 40 inches of snow for the month of February alone. And when you do a 6 or 8 inch storm, it's not terrible. But when you have 1 6-inch storm and then another, all of that snow that we push from one side of the district to another has to go someplace and it gets piled up. This is a picture directly in front of the high school for the visitor parking. So we have to push that snow someplace and open up as much of a parking lot as we can. Obviously, we're going to lose parking spots. The skid steer loader, once we get a break in the weather, we can start chipping away at this pile, load it into the back of our dump truck and relocate it to another campus where we have room for it, or to an off-site location, more specifically across the street from the Emmaus Market. So the skid steer loader is going to help us move these large piles of snow when we get the opportunity. Aside from that, on a daily cleaning, sidewalks and when you get those storms at a couple of 3-4 inches, the 6 or 8 inch storms, we're looking to purchase a snowblower attachment for the front end of the skid steer, as well as a brush attachment. If you've seen the piece of equipment we have right now, the Ventrac, we have both a snow blower attachment and a brush attachment for this. So initially we'll go through with the snow blower, and we have a decent sized storm. We'll push that snow right off the sidewalk. And then potentially in this particular case, what you're looking at, the brush did this kind of work. So we'll get a little bit of ice, we'll get a little bit of snow, we'll get a 1 or 2 inch snowstorm, and we'll actually take that brush attachment on the front of the Ventrac and run right over the sidewalks. And you can see on the right-hand side, it brings it right down to bare sidewalk. So the brush attachment and the snow blower attachment for the skid steer loader would do the same thing here. The Ventrac that we're using at Salisbury Elementary, we would actually push over to the middle school to help assist with the sidewalks that are along that campus, in between the parking lots in between Salisbury or middle school and Western. So we're not going to lose the use of the Ventrac. We're just going to push it over to the other side of town, continue the use of that, and let that crew experience some of the fun of using that as opposed to shoveling everything. And then have the skid steer loader, even with the general storms, for easier moving of the snow. But when we get into the bigger storms, this is something we can handle. Now, this contractor that we've utilized, we've used him in the past. We had to utilize him in this particular storm. He is actually a Salisbury resident. So we try to keep the money in town as much as we can when we need to use them. But this particular storm, just this one storm is the only one we used them on this year. This was a $6,000 tab from him. So something I want to try to get away from is utilizing contractors as much as possible, especially when they come in at this kind of cost. But there was a lot of time spent helping us clean out the sidewalks here and along the high school, cleaning out the front of the administration building where these piles were built, and then helping us clean up around the Salisbury Elementary as well, so we could dispatch a plow over and run 2 plows over at the high school. This was, in reality, it took us, we were ready to open up school on the 3rd day after the storm. We still had some work to do, but we could have virtually opened up. But obviously you couldn't put buses on the road after this particular storm that soon. So that's the reason we're looking for a skid steer loader, help us keep work in-house, move this snow that we currently can't move right now with our existing equipment, and hopefully just get everything done a little bit quicker, a little bit sooner, a little cleaner. The skid steer loader, the skid steer alone with a bucket, the snowplow attachment, the snow blower attachment, and the brush attachment is right at $58,000.
Hey, Bill,
Yes.
a couple questions for you.
Absolutely.
Number one, I saw the pictures of what you showed us, and I saw that it was a wheeled skid steer. Any thought as to wheels over tracks?
Yes, I looked into that. The manufacturers, the 2 manufacturers that I spoke with actually say the wheels do better in snow than track. The other thing is I would feel wheel is better for our purpose overall. There's going to come a time that we're going to have to run this on an athletic field, and a track system will tear up an athletic field very, very quickly. So
It'll destroy it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I ran Army tanks for 8 years. I know what kind of damage we can cause on an open ground. We had fun doing it. It wouldn't be so much fun this time, but yeah.
So my other question is, so you said that the last bill for this large snow removal was about $6,000.
Correct.
On average, I mean, obviously last year was the anomaly in that we didn't have much snow at all.
Right.
How much are we, is it $6,000 a year that we're spending on? Basically, I'm looking to see like when this skid steer would pay itself off.
Bill, I can jump in here real quick. Once we're done with the purpose of why we need it, I'll go into the financing of it, the cost, and how to handle that. So
okay, so let's we'll table that for the moment.
It's a valid question, and it's one of those pieces of equipment. The more snow we get, obviously, the faster this thing's going to help pay itself off. The more work we're able to do with it in the summer, whether we're renting and digging post holes for various types of projects and batting cages and things of that nature that we've done recently. Obviously, the more we're going to use this, the faster it will pay itself off. Any type of this kind of equipment that you're looking for a maintenance field, you're really looking at, before we get our true monies back out of it, you're probably around the 15-year mark before we really get our monies out of it for what we've used it for. So
Okay.
it's extended time.
And from like April's, or let's say Marchish, April through October, November, what do you think the best uses of this piece of equipment are?
Again, if we have those special projects now, if you look at the high school, the discus cage, we built that in-house. We set that up. The batting cage that's underneath the bleachers, the benches that are out front, those were all projects that we had to rent a post hole digger to build those types of projects. And this the skid steer loader would greatly assist us with that. General cleaning with the brush attachment, simply general cleaning around the driveways and parking lots, especially coming out of winter with the salt and the sand that's built up around there. So we could use it, get for mowing attachments in the future. We could rent larger mowing attachments to do the field across the street on Emmaus Avenue that we have to mow a couple of times a year. So there's some other uses for it outside of winter. But honestly, the primary use, the primary look is the winter time.
So Joe, let me jump in a little bit more. So we have two vent tracks currently. One is at the high school, one's at the elementary school. We could ideally use a third one, at the middle school, but instead of getting a third vent track to serve those purposes, the skid steer gives us more versatility, and it can do some things that we can use it district wide, beyond just these snow banks that we can't clear with a truck. We put the trucks through a lot of abuse of the back and forth. Whereas if we can allow the snowplow trucks to do more straight paths, then you can use the skid steer to come and clean up, the parking lots. We had an issue with, a couple trucks breaking down due to the heavy lifting of the snow. So it's a valuable piece, but I want to show you something. I'm going to share my screen just 1 second of where this is going to fit into our capital equipment plan. So if you remember 2 years ago at this time, we talked about all of our capital equipment, setting up a replacement cycle for them so that we have money for these needs when they come up, rather than trying to find money and squish it into a budget when machines break down. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and show you where this fits into our plan, because that actually fits quite nicely. So can everybody see the Excel screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So if you remember, we had the summary and we said we needed to put $64,000 a year away after an initial investment, and that we'd be able to fund all of our equipment replacement throughout. And we had borrowed some money in the summer projects money to buy some equipment up front so we could, kickstart this plan. Part of the plan has replacement of these two tractors right here. A John Deere, which we were supposed to replace in 2019 at an expected cost of $40,000. We still have that. We've not replaced that yet. So that money was in for the bond funding to cover for the equipment, which we've not spent yet. And then we have this Massey tractor, which is due to be replaced in 2 years, another $40,000 piece of equipment. Ideally, instead of just adding additional piece of equipment, we'd like to replace in the capital equipment schedule this Massey tractor with the skid steer loader instead. Okay. So I had 50, but when you add in all the attachments, you're at 58. Now, how this affects us, it's two things. It's where do we get the money today to pay for it? And two, how does this affect our operational budget going forward? Correct. So as you see this Massey tractor, if we pull this out and replace it, $1,600 is the annual investment into that. Okay. And if we go back to the summary page, so $64,000 is what we put aside annually for our capital equipment. If we bump it up to $50,000 for this piece of equipment, it's $2,000 a year instead of $1,600. So it affect our operational budget going forward about $400 a year. Okay. So financially, budget wise, it's not a significant impact going forward. So it'll basically replace, and we would not replace the Massey tractor. We would use the Bobcat instead. Because what happens is this Massey tractor is over at the middle school. If we send the vent track over there, like Bill was saying, that covers our needs there. And it's actually a more efficient piece of equipment. When we got those vent tracks, it really made it much easier to do a lot of the tasks. So it's actually be better purpose to have a vent track over there than the Massey. And then we have the Bobcat, which can do what the vent track does for us at the elementary school, but gives us the enhanced usage of being able to move these snow piles. So even in the smaller snowstorms where you get 4 or 6 inches of snow, especially at the admin building, you push a lot of snow up against the building and there's nowhere to go with it. Well, now they can actually take the skid steer with a bucket and move that snow out of the way or anywhere else where it piles up. So it helps us with big storms, helps us with the smaller storms, and then all the versatility of attachments. It really serves a lot of needs greater than what we can do with event track currently. So that's how it affects our operational budget going forward, about $400 a year. But how do we pay for it today? So in the bond issuance for the capital equipment purchases, we had allocated $225,000. And these were the pieces of equipment we were looking to acquire to bring our fleet up to date. And here's where the budgeted costs were. Okay. You'll see the amounts we spent so far. So we did get the vent track, which was a very, very useful tool for us. We got the utility trailer, we got the forklift, line painters, and the 2-man lift. We have not replaced the John Deere tractor yet. We've not replaced the MIG welder. We've not replaced the floor scrubber or the carpet extractors. So of the $225,000 that was allocated that we have currently sitting in the bond funds, we've only spent $101,000. So this is where we would get the money from to be able to acquire this equipment now. We don't have to go out and lease lease it or anything. And it's money that's allocated already for capital equipment. And we would be pushing off the replacement of this John Deere at this time, since we'd be removing the Massey. The John Deere would fit that purpose for us.
Mike,
So-
you mentioned a word there that actually is a good question, though. I know there's companies out there that do lease equipment, long-term lease equipment like this, and at that point in time, maintenance is also covered as well. Is there a benefit of buying it outright as versus leasing something like this, where your maintenance is kind of like taken off the table?
Maintenance contracts attached to these leases is usually pretty extraordinary and raises your cost dramatically. In the past, when I've looked at leasing long-term equipment like that, or even just Ford or Chevy trucks, it's never really been worth the value when you look at the additional cost of the maintenance contracts that go with them. So I didn't look at a lease option on these, just based on past experience of looking at them for various items.
Okay.
And Joe, that is a great question, because a lot of times those can be useful, but in a school district, the amount of use we get on them, it's not something that we're going to be using like a tree contract or somebody using it every day, right? So, after 5-10 years, you're going to be putting a lot of
Hours
into it. So yeah. And then as far as the leasing, I did check with Fulton Bank too, just to see what kind of rates we'd have for leasing. And really financially, this is the better way to go for us at this time.
Okay.
Bill, as far as, I'm sure there are going to be some times that you need it on the east side and west side. Does this have to be trailered?
Absolutely. We have a trailer that can handle it.
All right. And I think the next question, I think the answer is going to be pretty obvious. You did talk to the township about how they're pushing the snow. And I know it's probably, I don't know how successful you were, but I'm sure you told them about that.
I think we have a conversation almost every year. They're kind of stuck as well. Now, if you look at that road or any of the road that comes perpendicular to the administration building, there's parking on the side of those roads, and there's no place for them to put that snow. So it gathers on their plow and they push it straight down. They plow when there is sidewalks, especially, they plow curb to curb. And to get a good example of that is when you drive around the high school or you drive around Salisbury Elementary, you'll see that the snow, when it's cleared off the road, goes right to the curb of the sidewalk. So all of that snow has to go someplace, and it goes onto regretfully, it goes onto our sidewalk. I'd love to see them stop a little shorter, but then they're going to start losing roadway by doing so. So they plow curb to curb, and those particular streets that are up above the high school and up above the administration building, there's just simply no place for them to go with the snow, with the cars that are parked along the side. So they're kind of stuck in a hard place, a little bit just like us, where are we going to put the snow when we get it? So.
Okay. All right. And a couple of those with Mike's presentation, I guess you're talking about replace this piece of equipment with this new skid unit. You aren't literally replacing them. Some of that old equipment you're going to keep, hopefully, as spares if needed, correct?
the Massey we're going to keep in service until it becomes to the point where it's no longer worth repairing. We've put some decent money into it over the last couple of years to keep it operating strong and safe. But we're getting close to the point where we start putting much more money into it. It's just not going to be worth it. Typically, when that equipment is no longer useful and it's too costly to make useful, we'll list it for sale and take it off the books.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Bill or Mike? Okay, seeing none. So what are we looking for here? For this to be on the agenda for March also, Lynn?
So really, we're looking for the nod to go ahead. You would approve this when you approve the payment of bills.
Okay. All right. Is anybody opposed to this? Okay, so I guess that's your answer.
Let's move along before they find their unmute button.
Bill, I found my unmute button.
Thanks for everything you're doing, you and your staff, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Okay, looks like you're still on with this bus garage, Bill.
I am.
This doesn't sound good.
Actually, it is. I mean, you've been around long enough, George. You've seen these conversations on the bus garage for a few times. I know Mary as well has seen this conversation come up. So, for those that are unaware of what's going on with the bus garage cleanup, a quick history here on this slide. And in 1998, they were changing out the old underground storage tanks. And in the process of doing so, they realized they noticed a sheen in the soils, which meant that the underground storage tanks had been leaking. No one could tell for that at that time exactly how long and how much had actually gone into the ground. So over the next couple of years, they did their due diligence and researched how much went into the ground, how much of the grounds around the bus garage, across Trout Creek onto the ball field area of Salisbury Elementary, how much damage was actually done. This is being paid, this project right from the get-go is being paid by the Superfund. If you've ever heard about the Superfund that the federal government set up and billions of dollars were set aside to clean up grounds from fuel leaks and whatnot. And when you pay for your gas, when we buy our fuel, we pay a tax on that fuel, and that tax money goes back into the Superfund. But when you have to use the Superfund, in this particular case, we were given $1 million to fix and remedy this project. Over the last 20 years, we've spent approximately, I think we're closing in on $850,000 of that $1 million. So we're keeping an eye on where we are at with expending that. And if we spend over the $1 million, then anything that we spend over that $1 million will come out of Salisbury taxpayers, not out of the Superfund once we have breached that $1 million mark. So until we've been to the board a couple of times, we asked the board, do you want us to close this project down, or do you want us to clean the ground perfectly? And if we clean the ground perfectly, then nothing ever gets noted on the deeds or anything else. The other option a few years ago was to get a site-specific, what the PADEP calls a site-specific closure. So we know that the ground is going to be dirty. This is going to be listed on the deed that the grounds in this are going to be dirty. And if we ever want to sell that land, that notice will be on the deed. And obviously the value of the land could go down, would most likely go down. So back in 2016, because of where we were at with our expenses towards this $1 million, the board said that gave me the go ahead to close this project out with a site-specific standard. And over the last couple of years, that's exactly what we've been working with our contractor and with PADEP to set this up and finally bring this project to a close. So here we are this year. There's been a couple of delays because of different issues over the years, but COVID was one of the big delays in the last year. PADEP has approved our site-specific plan to close this project down. One of the reasons to close this down, of course, is you don't want to spend over that million and then everything else comes out of our pocket. But the other problem is back in 2014, we had a fuel delivery. He was taking the fuel out of his tanker and putting it into our ground incorrectly. The hoses were hooked up incorrectly, and he spilt a fair amount of fuel over the top of the ground. Now, it ran over the top of the ground. It went into the couple of the drains and went down into Trout Creek. But part of this monitoring system for the original bus cleanup, there are numerous wells throughout that property so that we can go in and test the grounds. Some of that fuel went into those wells. So now we're starting to think we've got to close out some of these wells so that we don't have this problem again. So one of the reasons that we pushed hard in 2016 for the board to approve the site specific is so that we don't have to worry about ground issues again and these wells being filled up with fuel being spilled. So we have the permission from PADP to move forward with the site specific plan. And I would say it's probably going to, at this point, probably take us about a year to do a full closeout on this. What we're going to be on the hook for over the next few years will be quarterly monitoring, annually monitoring of 1 or 2 wells that will need to be remain in place, and that's just so that PADP can see if the grounds are still starting to clean up themselves, or they're just going to maintain its current level of benzenes in the ground, and it is what it is, and it'll be noted on the deed forever. So that's just an update of where we're at. The PADEP approved our site-specific plan to close this out, and we will be moving forward towards that closure over the next year.
Bill, what's the ballpark cost on the monitoring that you're referring to?
Well, we'll still be well within, we won't break that.
Under the million?
It's a couple thousand each time we have to monitor, so we won't break that million. We're in a very safe place to do so, to move forward at this point.
Okay. Any questions for Bill? So at this point, do you need any kind of approval from us, Bill, to go that route?
No, but thank you for asking. The last approval actually from the board that we sought from the board was in 2016 for us to go to a site specific instead of a pure clean project, and you gave us that permission. This was just an update to let you know that you chose the site specific. PADEP has approved that, and we're going to move forward over the next year to finalize that and eventually close this project out within the next couple of years completely.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Any other items from the board? Okay, seeing none. That takes
George,
us
I
to,
had something, I raised my hand. George, I gave you a short text earlier tonight, just asking if we want to put something on next, I think it's next week, actually, maybe 2 weeks, I guess, agenda. Do we need to raise it tonight to tell you about it, or can we forward a link or forward a paper, to the group through email?
okay, I'm sorry, I missed that.
That's okay. No, it was a text. I didn't expect you to be looking at your text.
I don't think we have to formally do anything from the board itself. I think, Lynn, am I correct that we could just add that to the agenda with?
I'll forward an email and we'll just make sure that's something we're interested in, and then we'll put it on the agenda.
So is this something that you would be proposing to discuss in new business, making a motion to discuss it, and then the board seconding the motion and then moving into discussion?
I think it could
Is that
be,
your
I
question?
think it could be simple as it could be discussed, but we could probably go ahead and approve it. It's simply joining a movement for the school boards to support a reform for the charter school funding. Something that hasn't been changed for, I was shocked to hear 24 years is what we read. The funding hasn't been changed. So we knew this, but we haven't had our name on the list showing support for reform. So I think just to, we need to sign something and forward it on, but we just want to have a short discussion.
So this I'm not as sure exactly what you're referencing, but you might be asking the board to pass a resolution.
Yes,
based on it?
yes.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll do that.
Okay,
Through
great.
Audrey, just
Email and then we'll put
question.
it on the agenda.
If you have a written document or something that's already said, that might be good to
Yes,
get to Lynn so she can have that available so the board can read it and the public as well.
yes, that sounds good. We'll do that.
All right, great.
Okay,
Thank you, Audrey.
yep.
Okay, that takes us to citizen comments. Do we have any comments, Mr. Taylor?
Mr. Katanis, there's nobody that signed up in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next meeting is Wednesday, April 7th. And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So
So
moved.
move. Second.
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 Those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody, and thank you.
Take
Thank you,
care,
guys.
everyone. Bye.
Thanks for being around.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank you to our residents and staff members who joined us tonight. We appreciate you participating
Right.
and joining the meeting.
Thank you.
Definitely
Thank you.
agreed. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Night.